From time to time, I get asked questions all the time. And as you people probably know, I am an expert in the cabling industry. I am an RCDD and a technician. I have project management and estimating experience. I even have business leadership experience. But somebody asked me some questions, and I had to reach out for an expert.
Don't hang up that phone. We've found what you're looking for. Welcome to the Let's Talk Cabling podcast with Chuck Bowser, RCDD. Well, seeing how we're pulling Category 6A, the most powerful twisted pair in the world, you got to ask yourself this one question. Did I pull 295 or 300 feet? Well, do you feel lucky? Do you, punk? In this podcast, you'll learn the differences between a 66 and 110 punch tool, the proper way to install a support cable, along with testing and certifying the cable. What exactly does RCDD stand for? Registered Communications Distribution Designer. Just the expert you need to ensure your cable plant performs exactly as designed. The elite professional, knowledgeable, and experienced in leading-edge ICT design principles. So join us as we talk about the ever-changing world of telecommunications. From ISP to OSP, from copper to fiber, design to installation. Now, send the new guy to the truck for a bucket of dial tone and the cable stretchers, while you listen to an informative program on telecommunications.
But these are decision psychology questions. And even though I do have a formal education, it's in marketing and business management, not in psychology. So I had to call in an expert. So today with us, we have Tania Luna. Tania has a lot of expertise in this area. Welcome to the show, Tania.
I'm so excited to be here. And Chuck, actually, I have expertise in psychology accidentally. The only reason I have expertise in psychology is because I thought I was going to go into marketing. So it's almost like we're opposites of each other. Yeah. I started studying psychology because I thought I would pursue a career in marketing, and then just fell in love with psychology and stayed there.
I took psychology 1 year in high school, and I took it because I thought it'd be an easy class, and it wasn't that hard of a class, but I fell in love with that class. And if you ask any of my kids, or you even ask Barbie, that teacher, I still talk about that teacher to this day. That teacher one of the things he used to do is during the breaks between classes, he'd have bring his record player out by the door of his class. He used to play this song. What's the song, baby? She's not paying attention. Lean on Me. And that's yes, any of my kids or ask my wife, should they all tell you, that is my life mantra song.
Wow.
And it's just how much of an impact. And here I am 1 or 2 days since high school.
just what's the day?
Yeah, what day exactly. So why don't you tell us a little bit about you and what makes you an expert in psychology?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, I thought I was going to pursue marketing, and actually my boss at the time was like, well, don't study marketing. You should study psychology. And so I tumbled into this field and then found myself just really loving it. I started off just studying general psychology, and then quickly found my passion around organizational psychology. So what is it that we can learn from the field of psychology to apply to how to help people be their best selves at work and help organizations really thrive? Started doing research in that space. I really started off doing a broad range of research. So some of it was around group productivity and creativity. I did research for several years in the area of emotion regulation. I did research in the area of surprise psychology, which is actually how I met my co-CEO at our company, Life Labs Learning. She was also studying the psychology of surprise, and so was I. And very few people study this field. The last guy that was an expert in it died in like 1898, I think. So it was there was a lot of space for.
I think I went to high school with him.
That would be surprising. So you look great for your age, by the way. That's very impressive. So Leanne and I met because of this mutual love of the psychology of surprise, and both of us also had a passion for organizational psychology and helping people in the workplace develop skills that allow them to really bring out the best in themselves and others. And I joined her company that she founded, Life Labs Learning, where I've been for the past 6+ years. And what we do at Life Labs is we apply psychology to helping leaders and employees develop the skills that allow them to be their most productive selves, but also their most engaged and their most the best versions of themselves.
Right. And a happy version of themselves, because
Yeah.
a happy employee is a productive employee.
Yeah.
And so I've got some insight on the backside on this side of the computer, and I see the impact that you're making in some of the workforce. And I tell you, she's absolutely happy that, as happy as I've ever seen her working for a company. So
amazing. Yeah. So for listeners that don't know, so Barbie is my Barbie. I wonder if do you call her Mrs. Chuck? Because
no.
She's my coworker at Life Labs Learning. And for the longest time we called Chuck Mr. Barbie.
Yeah, I wasn't going to go there, but hey,
sorry, it's out there.
No. Actually, you talk about that in your book about, embracing surprise. There you go. I just got to pivot, right?
Keeping you on your toes.
Exactly right. So let's talk a little bit about the book first. What made you guys write this book?
Yeah, so Leanne and I wrote our first book. It's called Surprise, Embrace the Unpredictable and Engineer the Unexpected, I think. Is that what it's called? You're holding it. I think that's what it's called. Okay. We're actually right now finishing up our second book that's going to come out in September. In September of 2021. It's called The Leader Lab, Core Skills to Become a Great Manager Faster. And that's based on the work that we do at Life Labs. What propelled us to write the Surprise book is that, as I mentioned, very few people were looking into this field. Surprise is with us every single day, probably in 2020, more so than most other years. But it's this thing that's so misunderstood, and we think about it so rarely, and we don't really have the vocabulary or the tools to harness the power of surprise and to reduce the negative impact of negative surprise. And so we really wanted to bring it out into the general public. Because it really just shaped so much how we thought about our life and our work.
Yeah, because you don't think of, when you think of business books and business titles, you don't necessarily think about surprise,
right?
As a business book. And like I mentioned before we started doing the interview, I'm about halfway through, and I'm addicted to this thing. It's almost like you wrote it. It's talking to me. I could talk about, like I said, I got 2 pages of notes here, but I think the one quote that I got out that I really love out of this thing is it's basically says, it's a crying shame to live as though. Hold on, I got to put on my safety glasses in case the words pop up and injure my eyes.
All those sparks flying from the book.
These are not reading glasses. Okay, just
no, I would never.
It's a crying shame to live life as though it came from an instruction manual. I love that, and I love that for my industry, because everything we do is an instruction manual. We have this book called the TDMM, the Telecommunications Distributions Methods Manual. It's 2,000 pages of raw, boring, technical manual stuff.
Right.
And it does attract a certain type of person to our industry who like A plus B equals C. It's got to go in that numerical. It's got to be done that way. If it's not done that way, it's not right. And this book thinks outside that box.
I appreciate that. I think you're exactly picking up there the intention. And I think the secret to both work and life, or at least one of the secrets, is finding that balance between appreciating the A plus B. Did you say A plus B equals C? Is that true?
That's what they taught me in high school.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. That's how you use the alphabet. But I think there's so much importance in doing what you're doing with this show, which is passing on knowledge and passing on, things that are already known, but also creating that space for the unknown and the unpredictable and the surprising. And one of the concepts we talk about in the book is really finding that balance on the surprise seesaw.
That was my favorite thing. I love the seesaw, because on the seesaw, there's actually what it's in my notes, the surprise seesaw, right? And on one side, you have too much predictability. It's funny, when I read that, I was like, that's me. That's my life. Because if you look at my life over the last 15 years, I've gone through phases, right? So there was a phase where I was a volunteer firefighter for about 10 years.
Wow.
There was a phase where that, for example, I still am a biker, but I'm not as much of a biker as I used to be. It seems like almost every decade I reinvent myself. And I've never, and
You're like Madonna.
I've known that about myself but I've never known why.
Mm.
And then when I read that, the surprise seesaw, it's like, that's dead on the money, because I'm bored.
Right.
I'm bored. And
the
I'm
thing
looking
is that I think most people find themselves in that slump and they just go, well, I guess that's life. There's this really sad research that shows that for most people, their most memorable life experiences happen between the ages of about 16 to around 25.
Right.
That is a tiny, tiny fraction of life, right? So how could you reverse those statistics and go, well, I'm not just going to wait for those kind of predictable life milestones to be the bright times in my life, but how do I design it and engineer it for myself and the people around me?
Right.
Because, while many of the most amazing things that happen to us are outside of our control, we can engineer these times of growth and of challenge and of adventure and of discovery. And sometimes that's really big, like what you've done in your life. And sometimes you see really big impact with a small intervention, like, start turning left when you leave your home instead of turning right. And you never know what new thing will happen.
That's another facet of the book that I just absolutely love, because you talk about how when things go wrong, find a way to find the silver lining in that cloud. And quick short story, when Barbie and I used to ride a lot on our Harley, we rode down to about an hour south of us. We had to go to a biker's funeral. And on our way back, coming up 75, the sky just opened up on us. I mean, just cats and dogs, and rained so hard that when it hit you in the face, it felt like somebody was sticking needles in your face. That's how hard it was raining. So generally what happens in that kind of weather, bikers pull over underneath the bridge and they wait for it to stop. So we pull over and I get a flat tire and the whole 9 yards. And we could have sat there and we could have focused on the negativity all this time, but we look back at that now and we laugh about that whole thing. And we think about the great time that we had. And it's just, it's how you embrace it, right? You can think about things negatively. You can think about things positively. And, the funny part is, since you told on me, I'm going to tell on Barbie. Okay. So when we got stuck on that deck, so I came off the highway and they just paved the highway. So there was like about a 3-inch lip on the road from where the shoulder was. So when I came off it with my motorcycle, of course, that lip made the bike kind of jar over, and I went shooting off into the median. And of course, it's pouring down rain. I stopped the bike and it's starting to sink in this mud. Oof. And I'm like maybe 100 feet from the bridge. So I see the guy I'm riding with, he starts going up and I can see he's having problems with traction. So I'm like, I got to do this too. So I start taking, well, Barbie hopped off the bike. I told her to get off because they didn't want the bike to fall over on her. Yeah. And I didn't know this, but she was standing behind the bike. So of course I give a little bit of gas and wheels. It was Vinny from My Cousin Vinny. I sprayed her from head to toe with mud.
One of my favorite movies, by the way. So
yeah. Yeah. So I get up underneath the bridge and she comes up and she goes, I'm covered with dirt head to toe. I'm looking at the flat tire. I didn't even look up, and sure enough, she's mud head to toe. So here we are, these big hardcore, biker guys, where water's going down the side of the highway. We're scraping water with our hands and we're splashing on Barbie.
Oh my God. Oh my God. I love that visual. This is what came up in Leanne's research. One of the ways she got interested in this topic was she was looking at what were people's best memories. And she found that almost every single time they contain an element of surprise. And one of the surprising things about that is that very often these were technically bad things that happen. Like we write in the book about this woman that Leanne interviewed whose heel snapped off on her wedding day just as she was about to
walk down the aisle. Yep.
And she's just like hobbling down the aisle and everyone's laughing. And that's the part that she's able to relive with such joy when she looks back on it. You would never plan that as part of your wedding day, but it becomes this really bright spot in your memory. One of my favorite things that we write in the book is actually something Leanne said that I think about often, which is we feel most comfortable when things are certain, but we feel most alive when they're not.
Right.
And I think, 2020 was such a lesson in knowing how to move with the negative surprises and also being able to weave in more of the positive surprises to give ourselves that sense of aliveness, because otherwise you can feel such monotony right now for some of us, and for others we're struggling with extreme negative surprise that we have to figure out how to be resilient against.
Yeah. And this also ties in with business decision making as well too, because you're going to be making tons and tons of business decisions. should I bid that job or not bid that job? Should I hire that person or not hire that person? Should I
Right.
fire that person or not fire that person? I mean, there's lots of business decisions, and there's going to be some good ones and bad ones, and it's same thing there. It's that whole surprise element, and it's
Yeah.
what you might think might be a bad decision today. Let's not pursue that one particular job because it just, I don't know, for some reason it doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Then you find out later on that the contractor who did win the job, it was totally messed up, and they ended up losing everything because of that. So
Right.
the surprise thing even goes for business decision making as well. It
Yeah.
absolutely
That's
ties in.
fair. I think that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about I'm really interested about the corporate psychology, and how's that different from personal psychology?
Yeah. I think when you look at something like corporate or organizational psychology, essentially you're going not just looking at how do we predict an individual's behavior? How do we set up an individual for success? Now you're going, what happens when you get a bunch of individuals together? And now going back to your math of A plus B equals C, the other funny math I'll introduce is when people come together, it's not 1 + 1 = 2. When it works out really well, it's 1 + 1 = 3 or
Right.
beyond that. When it works out really poorly, it's 1 + 1 = -2, right? So when people come together, we can either bring out the worst in each other or we can bring out the best in each other. And so a lot of what organizational psychology focuses on is how do you help people succeed when they work in groups? And there's lots of different areas of specialization within organizational psychology. Some organizational psychology focuses on things like team dynamics. How do you get people to, use conflict productively? How do you help teams make decisions effectively together? And some other aspects of organizational psychology look at systems and processes and organizational culture, and how do you create an environment that brings out the best in people? As human beings, we're often so focused on ourselves and our beliefs and our individual behaviors, we forget how much the environment shapes that. And organizational psychology, a lot of it is about the sort of container of the workplace.
Right.
How do you build that container to really help people be at their best?
Right. One of the things in the ICT industry is a lot of the organizations are your traditional, one person at the top, 50 people at the bottom. I know there's a plethora of companies, some included, that have a flat organizational structure. Psychology wise, how's that better than a traditional business environment?
Well, I think even though I personally prefer a flatter organizational structure, it's not necessarily that it's better. It just depends on what you're trying to achieve. So really kind of stringent hierarchical structures are great in predictable environments. Like you've got one person who's got all the information, and they're going to efficiently give all of that information down to everyone who doesn't have that information. That works great. When you're in an unpredictable environment, all of a sudden you see companies that are succeeding needing to function much more like an organism. So think about like your body, right? You don't have just one, even though many of us think of like the brain as passing information down, the truth is that it's much more dynamic than that, right? Like you touch a hot stove, that's the boss in that moment deciding it before it even gets to your brain. Your nervous system knows to pull your hand away from the hot stove. So the more unpredictable an environment, the more dangerous it is to have that slow hierarchy of one centralized source of power passing on the knowledge to everyone else. And you really need an environment where you've got everyone with the autonomy to make decisions quickly in a way that's aligned but independent, and everyone with the ability to pass on information to everyone else. So you can't just wait for, one sort of Wizard of Oz that knows everything, that's all knowing, to pass that information on. You really need to harness the power of the individual to make decisions, to generate ideas, and to educate everyone else.
Right. Now, I know that, the ICT industry, like I said, it is that hierarchical, like you mentioned. But now that I've because Life Labs was the first time I was ever exposed to a flat organization. And when I compare contrast my experience to what I'm exposed to, I wholly believe in the flat structure. Because in a hierarchy, you said you got that one person, but I can count on more than one hand how many times a business, has gone under because the owner died.
Right.
And if you got that, that structure, then you got, you're affecting not just obviously that family who owns that business, but every
Right.
family underneath that person's affected. And you're right. It just, especially when you get your bigger organization to get in multiple layers on top of that layer, it's a slow moving thing, period. So if you need to move quickly to respond to, like a bid or some kind of a situation. I did a project in Ohio, and it was for MCI WorldCom, and we had an issue out there, and I made a phone call. The company I worked for at the time was a nationwide communications contract. They had offices all over the United States, and I needed people. I needed 100 people on the job site literally the next day.
Wow.
Because they made a change in the schedule, and we just had to have it done. And just because of the hierarchy structure, we got them there, but it took a bit of time.
Yeah.
I think if we had a flat structure, we probably could have responded to that quicker and easier. And I think we probably could have had a more satisfied customer and more satisfied employees. Let's forget that, right? Because if the employees aren't happy, your customer's not going to be happy. You got to take care of the employees first.
That's a huge part of it. And I think, I think back to kind of the history of how managers as a construct were invented. And at least from what I've read, it seems like it really popped up as a construct during the Industrial Revolution, where we went from craftspeople who knew their craft, who owned their work, to now having the factory worker who's kind of like the hands, to the manager who's doing the thinking, and they're the mind. And I think in many ways we've now come full circle to a place where people are craving the right to think and do,
right?
And to separate the thinking from the doing is slower.
Right.
And it, in some cases, could be really efficient if you're like, I want everyone to do things this one way, follow the instruction manual only. So I'm not necessarily advocating for a complete, let's remove the efficiency of hierarchy, and let's remove the efficiency of some people being experts and passing on their knowledge. But what if there was a space to also create the the yes and? So can we benefit from the instruction manual and create some space for surprise and a little bit of chaos? And I think especially if you're talking about like a family-owned business or a single business owner, that can be really scary because you're giving up some control. You're giving up, you're going from being the boss to sharing that responsibility and that power with others. And I think at first, really, I wouldn't suggest giving it up entirely right away, but just start small, creating space for people to submit ideas, to own projects, to have input. All of that is a way to build toward sharing in the creation of this business.
So you kind of even talked about that in the book, where you talked about, here we have an access to, TVs with 180 channels and the internet with all the information in the world and all that stuff. And we do have a smarter workforce now. It's not like it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, or even 50 years ago, actually. We have a smarter workforce. And if you engage them, mentally, and also make them part of the decision-making process. I mean, I've always found when we do bids, for example, when I was an estimator, if I knew I was bidding a job for a particular customer and I knew that customer liked a project foreman A, right?
Yeah.
If I had the time, and if the project foreman A had the time as well, I would bring him in as part of the estimating process.
Love that. Yeah.
And then that way, that does two things. One, make sure that I'm more accurate, but two, it gets buy-in from that project foreman who's going to be doing the project.
It's great.
Which makes it on down the road, it makes it a lot easier, because there's a harsh relationship between estimating and field staff, because if anything goes wrong, the first thing they say is the estimator messed it up. Mm-hmm. Well, an estimate by nature has mistakes in it. It's why it's called an estimate.
Right. It's a guess.
It's a guess. It's a guesstimate. That's what we used to call it. Exactly right. So if you bring them as part of that decision process, now they have ownership in that decision.
Yes.
And now then when they're more willing to work along, because there's always something wrong. They're more willing to work along with that kind of stuff. So that's why I said there's a lot of stuff that's tied in. That's why I said, I'm just getting to the part now where you're talking about the advanced tools for making the surprise engineers. I'm just getting to that point right now. So I'm
very excited to hear what you think and what you do with it. Can I actually share a model from Life Labs Learning that could be helpful based on what you're just bringing up when it comes to engaging employees and making them part of the process? So it made me think of a model that we teach at Life Labs called the CAMPS model. And you can think of it as being in the engaged or disengaged camp. And CAMPS stands for the 5 brain cravings that we all have that translate over into engagement. And engagement in the workplace is like an eagerness and a commitment, and is a big predictor of both productivity and retention. So it's really worthwhile to think about as a business owner. And CAMPS stands for certainty, autonomy, meaning, progress, and social inclusion.
Is there going to be a test afterwards? I feel like I need to be writing this down.
If it is, it'll be a surprise pop quiz.
There you go.
But so certainty is you got the instruction manual, right? Like, you don't want to send me out into the field and go figure it out. Right. It's about having some predictability, having something that feels solid and consistent. So if we're talking about the surprise seesaw, it's like the good, stable routine and ritual. Then autonomy is a lot of what you're talking about. Can you give people more of a sense of choice and voice and ownership? Because what we know is that the more people feel a sense of ownership over the work, the more committed they are, the more effort they put in. And then meaning is about, can I see the end result? Can I see the impact that I'm making? Am I hearing that customer feedback? Am I seeing that I'm needed by my team? That part is so important for people. Progress is, do I see that I'm getting somewhere, both, in terms of getting work done, but also feeling like I'm growing as a professional? Do I feel like I'm learning? And then finally, social inclusion is, do I feel connected? Do I feel like people are considering my perspective? Do I feel like a part of the team? So I know it's a lot to take in, but if you just think about CAMPS and think a little bit about how that applies to your business, a lot of ideas tend to pop up for folks about how to create an environment that really feeds more of those brain cravings for folks.
Right. I could easily just on each one of those probably talk about 15 minutes about each one of those things you just said.
Yeah.
Because like the last one, the whole inclusion, the whole being a part of that team.
Yeah.
You have to do that. You have to, if you're not part of the team, you get disassociated and productivity goes down, quality goes down.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't understand is they don't realize that quality doesn't cost anything.
Right.
Poor quality costs a lot.
Right.
Because you got to go back out and redo the work. And when you go back out and redo that work, how much is it costing you to go back out to redo that? How much money was that technician supposed to be making when they're supposed to be over on this job site making money? How much money are you losing because that customer just lost confidence in you?
Right. Absolutely.
I could go into each one of this in depth. Is CAMPS in here?
No, it's not in the surprise book, but it is featured in our new book, in our upcoming book, The Leader Lab.
I'll be buying that book. I
will be sending you a free copy.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. So I got to ask some questions from one of my audience members. And like I said, they're not technical questions. I consider them more business psychology questions. That's why I kind of tapped you into it. Because like I said, I did take 1 year of psychology in high school. And if I remember right, I think I got C's.
Well, as in A plus B equals C.
Exactly. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. That's known as the Pythagorean theorem.
Let's pull our psychology knowledge and answer your listeners' question.
There you go. So the first question, and these are verbatim how he posted them, and the guy who posted them, I think, is from Egypt. So there might be a little bit of a language thing here.
Okay. I love Egypt.
Yeah, I do too. My boss is from Saudi Arabia. So,
wow.
And it's funny because him and I are friends on LinkedIn, I'm getting like friend requests daily from people from the Middle East.
Look at you. Who knows where you'll be living next year?
I'm telling you. So the first question was how to be strong in decision making.
Okay. Yeah, I can definitely share some psychology around decision making. Should I just go into it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I want to learn this too.
Okay. All right. So a few thoughts come to mind, and I could talk about this forever. So cut me off. Let me know when you've had enough. Maybe the first thing that I'll share is something that I think a lot about when it comes to decision making, which is the word decide comes from the Latin to cut off. And I like remembering that etymology because to decide is as much about knowing what to do as what not to do. Mm-hmm. And so I think about decision making as this process of going really broad, examining all of the options, really exploring, and then narrowing until you've cut off all the different options and you've got your one solution. So that's just conceptually for some reason that helps my brain go, right, I am deciding, I'm cutting off.
Right.
In terms of what we know from research on what makes a decision maker effective, here are a few things that come up in the research. So one is something you already pointed out, which is involving other people's perspectives. Our brains are just so susceptible to our own biases, our own confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is like, if I think that something is a good idea, my brain is going to make it really hard for me to even see any evidence to the contrary. So the
Right.
more diverse perspectives I can bring into the decision-making process, the better, especially if someone's going to be the end user of that decision. I want to bring them in. So whether that's a client, whether that's a team member, if I want to get their buy-in, bring them in early on before the decision is made. So that's a big part of it. The other part of it that research shows is that when people are choosing between two things, they will almost always make a worse quality decision than if they're choosing between three things. So it's really important to try to get yourself out of the binary when it comes to decision making. Can you think of an example in your business where that comes up?
And I was thinking, because are you talking about, like, is this the marble story that's in the surprise book?
I don't even remember the marble story.
So the marble story talks about where you have two jars, right? You have two jars, and the one is you can't see what's in it. The other has white and black marbles, and the person was given the choice of reaching in either one of them, and then they had to guess which color marble.
So I think you're talking about research on kind of our how we act in the face of uncertainty.
Okay.
Right. So this is actually research that looks at literally where researchers followed teams that were making decisions and then followed up with them months later and said, were you satisfied or dissatisfied with the quality of your decision? Right. And what they found is that whenever you had a choice of two, so for example, let's say my decision is, do I hire this person? Do I not hire this person? As soon as I make it a choice of two things, I'm setting myself up for a worse quality decision than if I introduce at least one more option. So for example, instead of saying, do I hire this person? Do I not hire this person? I might say, let me choose between these three people. Or I might say, should I give this person a contractor role, a full-time role, or a role where they start off contractor and then later become full-time?
Gotcha.
So essentially you want it to be a better decision maker. You want to notice when you're kind of narrowing too much, and you want to introduce at least one more alternative to consider. Does that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. That definitely makes sense. I once almost took a job one time because, and I kind of stepped back and said, that's only one option.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, and I'm glad I did, because 6 months later, the company went out of business.
Oh my gosh. Right. Yeah. So you always want to, whenever you're making a decision, it should never be about, should I take the job? Should I not take the job? It's like, I could take the job. I could not take the job. I could wait for 3 months and decide if I'm going to take the job. So it's like expand a little bit before you narrow. And then maybe I'll just share one more decision-making tip, but I can go on and on if you want.
One more, because we got a couple more questions still. So go and do one more tip.
So one more tip is, I think a lot of times people forget what kind of decision they're making. What exactly are they deciding between? And so when we look at teams and individuals who are really good decision makers, they're also really good at literally articulating what is the decision I'm trying to make and what am I trying to achieve with it. So for example, if I'm going, should I take on this client or should I not take on this client? Or even, even maybe if I add some complexity to it, like, should I take on this client for a small job? Should I take on this client for a long-term job? Should I take on this client at all? What we find when we look at people who are really good decision makers is they link up to what is the goal? Like, what are they actually looking to achieve? Because it can be so easy to just narrow your focus to, should I do this? Should I not do this? That we forget, why am I doing this? What am I looking to achieve? How am I going to measure whether this was a good decision or not? So I think just being able to articulate and measure the why of the decision, the what will success look like, already helps you think much more strategically around that decision.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense, because if you do lose sight of the end goal, and the end goal was to hire somebody who knows how to have certain skill sets to, say, terminate fiber, and if you get so focused on this one individual,
right,
you might miss the details.
Yeah.
And then you won't find out till they can't do it.
And what we find with teams that are good at making decisions together is they'll literally write that out somewhere. They'll write it on a board, they'll write it on a sheet of paper. If you're working remotely, they'll write it on a document and share their screen.
Right.
And so that they can literally come back and go, wait, are we actually still remembering the goal of why we're making this decision?
Right. That makes absolute good. We get the devil's in the details. Sometimes we get so focused in the minute that we forget to take a step back and look at the big picture. Absolutely. Very cool. So the next question was, how long should it take to make a business decision? I guess that really applies to both. I mean, a business decision is not really different from a regular decision, right? I mean,
the decision.
Yeah.
I would say it's kind of like, how long is a piece of string? It really depends, but I think it's a great question because at the end of the day, it's kind of like, how bad or good will the outcome of the decision be? And the more dangerous it is, or the more important the opportunity is, the longer it makes sense to consider all of the different options. That said, what research does show is that when we are experts at something, our gut reaction tends to be better than when we take too long to think it through. So if your decision is going to impact a lot of people, or if you're not very well versed in the subject matter, then taking the time to really educate yourself and hear different people's perspectives is great. But if you are the subject matter expert, and if there aren't going to be a lot of other people who are impacted by it, then actually research shows that following your gut tends to lead to better outcomes. So I guess to summarize, are you the subject matter expert? Then go faster. Are other people going to be impacted? Then go slower. Are the consequences going to be really significant and far ranging? If yes, then go slower. And maybe just one other thing I would put in there is that I think good decision makers find ways to segment their decisions so they can get away with making a small decision faster. In other words, could you test it out a little bit? Could you make a temporary decision so that if you hate it, you're holding up the surprise book. Yeah.
It's in there.
So could you, for example, if you're like, oh, I don't know, should I take on this job or not? Could you do a 2-week version of it so that you have the option to change your mind without really setting yourself up for long-term consequences?
Right. I think another layer to that, and I think you talked about it in the book, or maybe not. There might be a more technical name for it. I call it analysis paralysis.
Yeah. Getting stuck with too many options.
Too much information. You just research and research and research and research and research. And at some point you just gotta stop and make that decision. You just can't, because especially with the access to the information we have now. I mean, you can spend days and weeks and months on the internet researching something. So ask me about RVs.
Psychologist named Barry Schwartz, who popularized this concept that he called paradox of choice. And the more options we have, sometimes it actually leads to poorer quality decisions, and it certainly can take much, much, much longer to decide.
Yeah, I knew I'd read it, and I knew I wrote it down. And,
well, that's in the book too. Geez, we just put everything we knew in there.
Yes. I'm telling you, if you listen to this show, you need to get one of these books. I'm just going to tell you that right now. You need to get it, and it's going to help you tremendously. And then the other question was the last one. It says, how to be patient and behave matured.
Yeah. So it sounds like the question is about times when you have the urge to maybe immediately speak your mind before fully hearing people out, or, if you're working with someone who's challenging, the very human part of us often doesn't invite patience. Instead, we're, either like sitting there frustrated and taking that frustration out on ourselves, or we're shouting out that frustration on others. So I think that drawing on my research in emotion regulation, I will share 3 tips, and I'll go quick. So tip number 1 is actually, in psychology, we call it affective labeling, which is basically just a fancy term for put your emotions into words. It turns out that when we can silently, I'm not saying shout them out, but silently put words to what we're feeling, what that does is it draws resources from the part of your brain that's feeling the intensity of that emotion, and it puts it into the more rational thinking part of your brain. So it's like a hack to basically get your brain to function differently. So if you're sitting there in a meeting, or if you're in a conversation, you're just like, I want to, jump through the internet or jump across the table and hurt this person. What you literally can do is get in the habit of saying in your mind, I'm frustrated, I'm annoyed, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm sad, I'm scared. The more you can put words to what you're feeling, the less intensely you'll feel it.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
One pro tip around being a human being, a better version of yourself. Another tip is just to start to understand, after those times that you've been frustrated, take the time to look back and go, what frustrated me about that? So that you can learn from it. Every frustrating interaction is like a course in yourself. It's like a master class in who am I? What upsets me? What drives me? What motivates me? And I think, stepping back to be able to learn from that can help you understand how to better avoid or prepare for those situations.
And not make them again in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And then the third thing I'll share is my absolute favorite psychology tool. And I'm pretty sure we write about it in the book, which is really learning to reframe and notice the positive in a situation. You probably knew I was going to say that at some point.
Well, actually, you called reframe, and you also called it something else too. You called it
reappraisal.
You called it reframing once, because I used it on Barbie tonight already once.
Oh my gosh, you were the best student.
And I said, you need to, whatever it was. She goes, oh, we call that reframing. I'm like, okay.
We call it in psychology, it's often called cognitive reappraisal, or I don't know what else we called it in the book. It's like, so it could be silver lining finding. Right. My coworker, Nedra, she calls it silver lining hunting. So she's like always hunting for the silver lining, which I just love. But it's really about saying, okay, I'm really annoyed with what's going on right now. I'm really frustrated. I'm really impatient. How else can I look at this? Can I learn from this? Is there something positive about this? Sometimes reframing is just going, this is temporary. It's an hour of my life. I'm not going to remember this a year from now. I was talking to someone recently who said she has a rule of 10, 10, 10. Will I remember this 10 minutes from now? Will I remember this 10 days from now? Will I remember this 10 years from now? And sometimes just allowing yourself a little bit of that distance reduces the intensity of the feeling.
10 minutes from now, I'm lucky if I can remember what I did 10 minutes ago.
Right? It's true.
That's one of the frustrations between my wife and I, because I have a really bad memory.
I do too.
And it bothers my kids too, because they'll come over and they'll say, Dad, when's my birthday? So let me get my phone out. And they're like,
but see, the way they can reframe that. Tools. You know how to use tools, and you took the time and you cared enough to put it in your calendar.
Oh, I'm going to remember that. I'm going to remember that, and I'm going to use that on them next time, because my youngest daughter does that to me all the time. She goes, you don't even remember my birthday, Dad.
Yeah, I would take someone who remembered to write something down over someone who remembered something any day.
Right. Very cool. Well, I appreciate your input tonight. Any final comments?
Oh my goodness. Just that whoever you are that's listening right now, keep listening to Chuck, because he is really a testament to someone who doesn't just notice a good idea and share it. He applies it and lives it. And I just have so much respect for you and for Barbie in the fact that you are constantly learning, you're constantly teaching others, and you are just creating so much space in your life to experiment and to try things out. And truly, I'm delighted and excited to see where you're going to be next year and how you're going to change yourself and your world and the worlds of people around you.
I appreciate that. The check's in the mail, by the way.
I will be going to my mailbox in 10 minutes.
My wife says I need to work better at accepting compliments.
Yes. There you go. And I'm sure that by the next time we talk, you are going to be better at that, because you actually set goals for yourself and you achieve them. And I just think that's amazing that you're.
And if you like what Tania was talking about tonight, she has a podcast. She kind of mentioned it a little bit. Yeah, you want to take just a few seconds to tell us about the podcast?
Sure. Thank you. Well, so we've got two podcasts in our world here. We've got the Leader Lab, which is the Life Labs Learning podcast. We talk about organizational psychology, leadership, personal development for leaders. And I personally have a podcast with my husband, my own version of a Mr. Barbie, Brian, and it's called Talk Psych to Me. And that is kind of a blend of psychology and humor. And you hear us bickering as a couple, and you hear us bringing new psychology concepts in every episode to our listeners.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm actually a subscriber of the Let's Talk Psych to Me. I'm actually a subscriber of that.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
I saw the posts for the Life Labs Learning one, but I hadn't subscribed to it yet. I don't know why. You look at my phone, I've got about 50 podcasts on my phone.
Yeah, I get it. As long as we're on your list somewhere there. I will say that the Leader Lab, each episode is 11 minutes or shorter. So nice. It's a very quick bite-sized leadership lesson.
Yeah, when I first started this podcast, its original title was 5 minutes with an RCDD. And my intent was to keep it to less than 15 minutes.
I feel like we've been talking longer than 5 minutes.
That's okay. If I have to, I can break this up into 2 different episodes. But I think this is such great content. I'm just going to put it out as a special episode. I'm just going to publish it straight out. And then, because I really think it's great content, because a lot of people that I'm interacting with, a lot of people that I'm mentoring that's in my study groups and stuff like that, their aspiration is to get out of the field and to get into the office. Well, they've already got the technical side of this stuff down. What they're really going to need is the business psychology and the organizational psychology and stuff like that.
Yeah. And what I would say about that is, like, it sounds like so much of the work that you're doing in the field is with people, and using those, at Life Labs, we often say, turn your workplace into a practice lab to master life's most useful skills. So I think it's really about how can you take the work that you're doing right now and use it as an opportunity, not just to get the job done, but to stretch your skill set a little bit. So maybe it's in how you communicate with your boss, or maybe it's in how you communicate with a customer. All of those every single day that you work are an opportunity to go, how can I do this a little bit differently so that I could build a new skill? Right.
Work outside that comfort zone.
Yeah.
Push against it. You'll find new ways. And you also have to have an open mind and listen to other people's input, no matter where they are.
There are teachers all around us.
Yeah. I'll give you a real quick example. We did a project in Mexico City. And so me and my boss went down there 2 weeks beforehand to kind of survey the land, look at the site and all this stuff. And while we were down there, the hotel we were staying at, we met this guy who was staying there as well. He actually was a loss investigator for one of the big credit card companies. I don't remember which one it was. And we just hit it up. We all kind of had the same interests and stuff. So we brought him to the construction meeting with us.
Wow.
Because he had nothing else to do that particular day. And so we're sitting in this construction meeting, and here we are, me and my boss, this time 20 plus years of construction industry. We got the general contractor and all the architects, hundreds of years of experience. And we're trying to figure out how to get these cables from this one point in this building to this other point in the building. And this guy who had absolutely no experience says, why don't you just trench the concrete?
Wow.
And we're like, why didn't we think of that?
Amazing. This is why sometimes you talk to kids and you're like, whoa, I just learned something from you, even though you just hatched, because experience could be amazing. And it can also be a detriment because it teaches us to look at things in just one fixed way. So absolutely. Yeah.
And kids have an untainted view of the world.
Yeah.
They haven't had a chance to get prejudices yet. So
exactly. Yep. Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's, dwelling outside your comfort zone, whether that's just, like I said, turning left instead of turning right, if you usually turn right, or have a conversation with someone, ask one more question than you usually would ask. And it's amazing how your life can really start to take you places you wouldn't have imagined.
Yeah. I can't wait to apply the ask 20 questions thing.
Yeah.
I can't wait for the first time. I can't wait because I'm always looking for a way to improve as an instructor, and I'm already thinking that one that was one, and then there was another one in there you talked about. Don't start off the way you normally always do. You might have worded it a little differently or whatever. So I'm already thinking about how I can start a class differently so people just don't automatically fall into that sleep zone within 5 seconds when I've got them in front of me.
Yeah. It's just about like keeping our brains almost in that state that they were in when we were kids, right? Like keeping the world around us fresh. And it doesn't have to be in huge ways. It doesn't have to be intimidating. It's just, how can you start off a little bit differently? How could you, make a joke where you wouldn't ordinarily make a joke? Things
absolutely.
Like that.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to have you on again later on. We'll come up with another subject matter because I really think that you got some good, valuable content that that I think the audience that I have, and even though while it might be small, it's a very dedicated group,
but mighty, and doing
yeah.
such important work.
And we're the ones that are making the communications possible between our location here and your location there.
I mean, talk about like you're like the backbone of society in so many ways. So I'm very appreciative of the work that you all do.
Yeah, the motto of the channel is connecting at the human level so we can connect the world.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
I don't know how I came up with that, because normally I'm not good at slogans, but it just came to me one day. I was like, oh,
this is really good.
I gotta write that down.
And really, I'm grateful for the work that you all do. It's like, how would we get through 2020 without you?
You know, that's actually put the whole remote workforce has challenged a lot of connectivity manufacturers and stuff. So, but we rose to the occasion.
Yeah. Goodness, yes. And I'm very grateful. And so is the rest of the world.
Okay, Tania, well, I appreciate you having you. And because if somebody wants to get in touch with you, is that okay for them to get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, probably easiest is check out lifelabslearning.com, and you'll see lots of resources on there. We've got the podcast. We've got a lot of free content. We have lots of free events. You can also find Barbie, aka Mrs. Chuck. And you can find me there as well, lifelabslearning.com.
Appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you so much, and you have a good evening.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.